The Westfield Corporate Plaza stretched like a gleaming glass fortress against the city skyline, its reflective windows catching the morning light. Inside the main security hub, monitors displayed every corner of the sprawling complex. Morgan. Chen approached her security station without fanfare, her wheelchair gliding silently across the polished floor. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, her expression focused and unreadable. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Security Operations Center hummed with activity as the morning shift began. Morgan's designated station sat alone at the far corner of the room, beyond the cluster of premium equipment and well outside the inner circle of the primary security team. Her monitors were older models, screens slightly dimmer than the others, cables neatly bundled but visibly worn. The station bore the unmistakable look of outdated technology, functional but forgotten, reliable but relegated to the periphery. A junior security officer passed by, glancing at Morgan with barely concealed amusement. "Wheelchair patrols early today," he muttered to his colleague just loud enough to be heard. Neither bothered to acknowledge her directly. Neither looked up from their tablets as they continued toward the premium stations. Morgan didn't respond. She'd heard worse. In the main briefing area, Director Victor Reed stood near the digital presentation board like a corporate recruitment poster come to life. His tailored suit fit perfectly across broad shoulders, his posture impeccable, his presence commanding immediate attention. The gathered security team hung on his every word as he traced evacuation routes across the digital display with confident gestures. "Full system integration test today, team," Reed announced, his voice carrying the easy authority of someone who'd never questioned his place in the hierarchy. "We're implementing the new AI-driven threat detection across all sectors." Someone nudged him and pointed toward the corner station. "She's still using that outdated terminal again." Reed leaned back to glance past the row of premium workstations, his security badge tucked casually in his breast pocket. "That's the backup system," he said with a dismissive laugh. "Looks like something from a technology museum." The group chuckled appreciatively. Lieutenant Carlos Vega, Reed's second in command, added with theatrical concern, "I think it still runs on Windows 10. Reed tapped his tablet thoughtfully. "Well, if the main system crashes, she can always monitor the old cameras manually. That's what they did before AI, right?" The laughter that followed was sharp and cutting. Back at her station, Morgan positioned her wheelchair precisely at her console, checking system connections with methodical precision. She pressed lightly near an aging camera feed switcher, listening to the subtle electronic hum that only experienced security professionals recognized. The day's assignment roster glowed on the transparent board facing the command wall. 12 names, 2 shifts, pristine organization. Under auxiliary monitoring, a single line read Terminal 7 Standard Protocols. No specific responsibilities, no priority areas, just empty space where recognition should have been. Reed's name appeared 3 times on the schedule: Primary Security Director, Implementation Lead, and Client Liaison. The golden boy of Westfield Security, tagged for every high-visibility assignment. By midday, the sun pressed hard against the building's western face, forcing the automatic tinting to darken the massive windows. While others gathered in the climate-controlled break room, Morgan ate alone near the building operations center, seated in her wheelchair with her security manual across her lap. She reviewed evacuation protocols in clean, measured lines. No commentary, just procedure codes and response data from her morning systems check. 2 junior officers passed within yards, heading to the cafeteria. One glanced over at her meticulous note-taking and shook his head. "She's still using paper logs. Maybe she's writing a novel about wheelchair crime fighters." His companion replied with mock sympathy, Someone should tell her about digital notes. They didn't slow their pace. Morgan finished her review and closed the leather-bound manual. With a soft pat, she adjusted her position, straightened her navy blue uniform jacket, and navigated the long path back to her outdated terminal. Her wheels whispered over the polished floor like secrets being shared with the building itself. As evening settled over the complex, the newer security stations were locked and secured with biometric protocols. Only one remained active, Terminal 7 sitting quiet and forgotten at the edge of the security hub. Its weathered keyboard caught the last light from the overhead panels like a veteran showing old scars. Morgan sat at her station, back straight. Despite the wheelchair, her posture a testament to years of discipline. Her security badge rested beside her monitor, access card hung from her chair. In her hands lay the same security manual, now open to a page marked Emergency Response Protocols, Power Failure Scenarios. A single line had been added in her own careful script. Trust your instincts, not just the system. She didn't smile. She didn't shift position. She simply turned the page and continued reading, preparing for a day when being forgotten might just become her greatest advantage. The maintenance reports came in faster than the building management system had predicted, notifications blurring. Across monitors one by one, like dominoes falling in slow motion. In the security center, officers hunched over tablets showing conflicting alerts. System diagnostics that didn't match. Temperature readings that made no sense. Pressure warnings that changed every few minutes. Building integrity looking sketchy, someone muttered, stylus tapping nervously against their screen. Director Reed stood at the front of the room, his usual confidence intact despite the deteriorating reports. People, this is exactly why we've implemented the most advanced security systems available. Let the AI handle the variables. That's what it's designed for. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The main security stations were equipped with predictive analytics, automated alert prioritization, and real-time threat assessment algorithms. Each officer had multiple backup protocols, redundant systems, and AI-assisted response planning that could theoretically manage building emergencies better than any human ever could. These readings don't make sense, warned technician Samira Patel, the systems integration specialist. We're seeing pressure warnings that don't match any of our building models. Reed waved off the concern. That's exactly why we have the new Sentinel system with full spectrum protection, adaptive alert filtering, and integrated emergency response. AI will compensate for any anomalies. Outside the main security hub, Morgan wheeled slowly through the eastern corridor, checking evacuation route markings by sight, listening to the subtle changes in the building's mechanical systems. Her weathered security jacket bore no special patches, no senior officer insignia embroidered above the pocket. Just clean, faded fabric that had seen too many shifts to count. The special assignment came down at 1400 hours. Full building systems test. A comprehensive emergency preparedness drill designed to push the new AI security system to its limits and demonstrate superior technology under stress. Reed would lead. From the command center, AI supports on full automation, redundant communication channels standing by. His name topped the assignment roster in bold letters. Morgan's name appeared at the bottom, almost as an afterthought. Auxiliary monitoring, East Wing, standard protocols. No special instructions, no integration notes, no briefing requirements. She acknowledged the assignment without comment and wheeled her way to her station while the primary team gathered around Reed for an elaborate briefing on the AIS emergency response capabilities. In the training room that evening, after the primary officers had finished their high-tech simulations, Morgan keyed herself into the corner terminal, the one marked with a faded maintenance pending tag that most officers avoided. The old system cycled up with mechanical sounds, its interface worn and outdated. She ran through evacuation scenarios manually, no AI assistance, no automated alerts, just logical thinking and the kind of institutional knowledge that took years to develop. The building schematic blinked slowly across her screen while she checked evacuation routes one by one, calculating occupancy flows that existed only in her mind and on paper maps she'd drawn by hand. The system glitched once during her third run, a momentary camera failure that would have triggered automatic rerouting protocols in the newer systems. Morgan adjusted her calculations manually and continued planning, the old terminal responding to inputs that had been forgotten by officers half her age. Back in her apartment that night, she spread a hand-drawn map across her desk. Pencil lines curved across the page in precise patterns, some overlapping with occupancy calculations, others marked only by coded notations that would mean nothing to anyone else. A strip of masking tape across the top read in her careful handwriting, East Wing, structural stress points. She sat for an hour with a ruler and soft pencil, refining an evacuation route that building protocols had marked as unnecessary. The main route was clean and approved, but the building models didn't account for traffic flow during panic conditions. She'd seen that happen once before in a different building. That evacuation hadn't gone well, and 3 people had been seriously injured. The next morning brought clear skies and a deceptive sense of routine to the Westfield Plaza. Morgan performed her systems check with methodical precision, verifying each camera, testing each alert protocol, listening to the building with an intimacy that bordered on telepathic communication. Inside her wheelchair's side pocket, she removed the protective cover from her personal tablet, a device that most modern security officers had replaced with company-issued equipment. Her hands moved across the screen with practiced efficiency. As she loaded her own building schematics, a supervisor nearby shook his head. Speaking to no one in particular, she really monitors those old camera feeds without AI filtering. No threat detection algorithms, no predictive alerts. His companion shrugged. Doesn't even use the new communication system half the time. Must be operating on intuition. They laughed, but neither called out to her directly. There was something about Morgan's quiet competence that discouraged casual mockery, a sense that she knew things they'd forgotten or never learned at all. As the systems test approached, building management continued its preparations, running diagnostics on every system and preparing to demonstrate the full capabilities of their new security infrastructure. Morgan made her final preparations. She updated her evacuation model on paper, adding new notes in the margins. Watch for crowd pressure at junction E4. Pre-position at service corridor. Keep voice calm, clear. The newer officers trusted their AI. Reed trusted his technology. Morgan trusted her experience. The morning briefing crackled with excitement as the systems test approached. Updates contradicted each other every 30 minutes, and what should have been a routine demonstration had become increasingly complex as more variables were added to test the AI's capabilities. Systems are showing some unusual feedback loops, reported Lieutenant Vega, staring at his tablet with growing concern. The threat assessment software keeps recalibrating baseline parameters. Director Reed stood at the podium in his perfectly pressed suit, a stark contrast to the anxiety rippling through the room. People, this is exactly the kind of scenario our advanced systems were designed to handle. The Sentinel AI will adapt to conditions faster than any human security team could react. In the back of the room, Captain Diana Rivera, the building's most experienced security officer after Reed, raised her hand. Sir, maybe we should consider scaling back the test parameters. These simulated threats don't match anything in our training scenarios. Reed's smile was thin and dismissive. Captain Rivera, I appreciate your caution, but we can't let every little complexity derail our certification schedule. The board invested in this AI system specifically, Because it can handle what older security protocols cannot. His gaze swept the room, landing briefly on Morgan, who sat alone in the corner with her hand-drawn evacuation routes spread across her lap. Some of us still cling to outdated methods, he continued, his voice carrying just enough volume to ensure everyone heard, but modern security requires modern solutions. We trust our systems because they're superior to human judgment. Rivera frowned. Sir, the auxiliary officer has more evacuation experience than anyone in this building. Maybe we should. The auxiliary officer, Reed interrupted, will follow standard protocols and observe how real security technology handles challenging scenarios. This is a teaching moment, people. After the briefing, Morgan approached the operations desk to review her assignment parameters. The duty officer, a young woman named Carla Washington, avoided eye contact as she handed over the bare minimum. Briefing packet, that's it? Morgan asked quietly, flipping through 3 pages that barely outlined basic monitoring responsibilities. Washington shifted uncomfortably. Director Reed said you'd be observing only. You're not expected to engage in primary response activities. What if primary response fails? Director Reed said that won't happen. The Sentinel system has redundancies beyond anything the old protocols could handle. Washington paused, then added in a lower voice, Ma'am, he also said you should focus on keeping out of the way rather than trying to assist. Morgan nodded once, her expression unchanging. She'd heard variations of this dismissal for years. The quiet assumption that disability meant incapability, that wheelchair meant weakness. Later that afternoon, she found herself in the maintenance office where Chief Engineer Tomas Reyes was reviewing building systems checklists. Reyes had been working on high-rise building systems since before AI monitoring existed, and his weathered face bore the lines of decades spent ensuring the safety of structures that others took for granted. Heard about tomorrow's big test? Reyes said without looking up from his paperwork. Full building emergency simulation. That's ambitious. The Sentinel has full integration capabilities, Morgan replied, checking the East Wind evacuation route map one more time. Reyes grunted. Yeah, I've seen those integration capabilities. Real impressive when they work. He glanced at her tablet. With its simplified interface and basic building schematics, a stark contrast to the holographic displays the primary team used. Of course, your approach doesn't need integration. It just needs someone who knows how buildings actually function. Director Reed thinks otherwise. Director Reed thinks a lot of things. Reyes set down his clipboard and looked directly at her. You know what I think? I think there's a reason they keep scheduling you as auxiliary. Not because you're second choice, but because when everything else fails, they want someone who actually understands the fundamentals of emergency response. That evening, as Morgan prepared her final route calculations, she received an unexpected visit from Captain Rivera. The senior officer knocked quietly on her office door, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing an expression of barely contained frustration. Mind if I come in? Rivera asked. Morgan gestured to the visitor chair while she continued plotting evacuation routes on her basic tablet. What's on your mind, Diana? This test tomorrow. I don't like it. Rivera sat her coffee down and studied the detailed maps on Morgan's screen. These are incredible. You mapped all the secondary routes? Walking the building a few hundred times helps with accuracy. Rivera traced one of the evacuation routes with her finger. I've been on the security team for maybe 4 years. You've probably been studying evacuation protocols for 20. Why isn't Reed asking for your input on emergency response contingencies? Morgan continued her calculations. Because Director Reed trusts his systems more than he trusts experience. That's what worries me. Rivera was quiet for a moment. I've been working with the Sentinel for 3 months now. It's an incredible system when everything works perfectly. But when something goes wrong, when the AI can't figure out what's happening, it can become unpredictable. And Reed, Doesn't want to hear that. Reed doesn't want to hear anything that suggests his golden system might have limitations. Rivera stood up, frustration evident in her posture. Look, I know you're scheduled as auxiliary, but if things go sideways... Tomorrow. I'll be ready, Morgan said simply. Rivera nodded, studying the older officer's calm confidence. I believe you will be. I just hope Reed figures that out before it's too late. After Rivera left, Morgan sat alone with her maps and emergency protocols, preparing for a test where she was expected to observe, stay silent, and stay out of the way. The building's systems continued their regular cycles, bringing fresh air through massive ducts, maintaining perfect temperature, and circulating water through miles of pipes. Tomorrow would test more than just the new AI system. It would test the dangerous assumption that technology could always substitute for experience, and that newer was always better. The breaking point was coming, and Morgan could feel it in the subtle changes to the building's normal sounds, the almost imperceptible shifts that no sensor could detect but that every experienced security officer recognized as the warning signs of systems under unusual stress. The systems test had intensified overnight, bringing pressure variations that made the building's monitoring computers issue conflicting reports every few minutes. By 0600 hours, 3 different diagnostic programs were predicting 3 different stress patterns, and the East Wing had become a mechanical mystery that no algorithm could fully interpret. Morgan arrived at the security center before dawn, carrying her worn leather protocol manual and a travel mug of black coffee. Terminal 7 sat exactly where it always did, forgotten at the edge of the hub, ignored by the technical staff who were busy calibrating the AI interfaces to perfection. She began her systems check with methodical precision, verifying every camera, every sensor, every communication channel that would matter when the AI stopped working. Her hands moved across the keyboard like a pianist's, feeling for inconsistencies that instruments might miss. Chief Engineer Reyes appeared beside her as she tested the manual alert controls. "Heard about your assignment parameters," he said quietly. "Auxiliary monitoring only. That's interesting." "Interesting how?" Reyes pulled out a tablet and showed her the official test parameters. "According to this, you're monitoring a section where they're simulating conditions the Sentinel has never been fully tested against. Communication disruptions that cycle every 30 seconds. Power fluctuations that don't match any known patterns. Occupancy sensors that could give false readings without warning." Morgan nodded, unsurprised. "And I'm supposed to observe how the advanced system handles it." "Right, except..." Reyes swiped to another screen. "I've been looking at the Sentinel's performance data from similar simulations. The threat assessment protocols get confused when communication patterns shift this fast. The automated alert system sometimes overcompensates, then stalls out entirely. Does Director Reed know this?" Reyes's expression was carefully neutral. "Director Reed receives all the same technical reports I do. Over the next 2 hours." Morgan quietly gathered information that nobody had asked her to collect. She spoke with maintenance personnel who worked on both old and new systems, reviewed technical bulletins that outlined AI limitations, and studied building schematics. That went back 15 years. What she discovered wasn't encouraging for the primary security team. The Sentinel's automated systems were designed for predictable emergency scenarios. They excelled in conditions that could be modeled, calculated, and programmed in advance. But the test parameters were generating security chaos, the kind of random, cascading failures that could only be navigated by experience, and the kind of intuitive response that computers couldn't replicate. At 1,000 hours, she found herself in the building archives, researching historical records of previous emergency drills. Most officers dismissed such research as unnecessary. After all, they have real-time simulation data and computer-assisted response planning, but Morgan was looking for patterns that sensors couldn't detect. She found them in a dusty folder marked Incident Reports, 2015 to 2022. 7 major emergency drills had attempted full building evacuation during similar test conditions. 3 had been forced to terminate early when their automated systems became unreliable. 2 had completed using manual protocols. 2 more recent attempts with a AI-assisted response had ended in simulated casualties when automated systems couldn't adapt to rapidly changing conditions. The pattern was clear. When scenarios exceeded the parameters that computers could process, success depended entirely on officer skill and protocol simplicity. That afternoon, Morgan made a decision that would have been career suicide if anyone had noticed. She prepared a supplementary response plan, a backup protocol for the East Wing that avoided the most dangerous choke points. The route was longer, more complex, and required constant human oversight that would be impossible for AI-assisted systems, but it was manageable even in chaotic conditions. She submitted the plan through proper channels, knowing it would likely be ignored or dismissed, but it would be on record, officially logged and available if needed. At 1400 hours, Director Reed conducted his final briefing with characteristic confidence. His presentation gleamed on the main display, every graphic perfect, every simulation tested and ready. "Conditions are looking challenging," he announced to the assembled security team. "But that's exactly why we have the most advanced building security system in the corporate sector. The Sentinel's integrated protocols will handle scenarios that would overwhelm traditional security responses." He glanced toward Morgan, who sat quietly in the back row. "Our auxiliary officer will be observing from a non-critical area, monitoring basic systems while the real security technology demonstrates superior capability." Several officers chuckled. Morgan didn't react. After the briefing, as officers headed to their stations, Captain Rivera approached Morgan one more time. "That supplementary response plan you filed, I saw it in the system. That's not a backup protocol. That's a completely different approach to the East Wing." "It's an alternative," Morgan replied simply. "An alternative that assumes the primary plan will fail." Morgan looked out at the security center where officers were taking their positions. At gleaming new workstations. Plans fail when reality exceeds their parameters. Emergency situations don't care about computer models. Rivera nodded slowly. "If something goes wrong out there, it won't be the technology that determines who gets everyone to safety. It'll be the people," Morgan finished. As the test approached and final preparations began, Morgan performed one last check of her outdated terminal. Every monitor showed basic feeds. Every alert required human interpretation. Every decision would depend on experience rather than algorithms. The newer security stations trusted their AI. Tomorrow that AI would be tested beyond its design limits. Morgan trusted her training, her eyes, and 15 years of security experience that couldn't be downloaded, updated, or improved by software. The fight back had begun quietly and methodically in the form of an old terminal and a security officer who understood that sometimes the best technology was no technology at all. The morning of the systems test dawned with an eerie quiet settling over Westfield Corporate Plaza. The usual bustle of employees arriving for work was absent, replaced by small teams of evaluators and observers strategically positioned throughout the building. In the central security hub, Director Reed stood before his command station, surrounded by technicians, making final adjustments to the Sentinel AI system. Multiple screens displayed real-time building data, threat assessment algorithms, and automated response protocols that updated continuously as test parameters were finalized. "Predictive threat analysis is showing green across all systems," reported his lead technician. "Adaptive response protocols are calibrated and ready. Emergency communication network is fully engaged." Reed nodded confidently. "Outstanding. This is exactly the kind of demonstration these systems were designed for. When the simulated emergency begins, we let the AI do what it does best." Across the security center, Morgan positioned her wheelchair at Terminal 7 with quiet precision. Her outdated monitors bore none of the sophisticated analytics or automated protocols that define the main security stations. Instead, they showed basic camera feeds, simple alert indicators, and the kind of direct information displays that had been largely abandoned by newer security systems. Chief Engineer Reyes paused beside her station, watching her methodical preparation. No AI assistance, no automated response generation, no predictive analytics. You sure you're ready for whatever they throw at this building? Morgan tested the manual alert protocols one final time. These conditions aren't about what the technology can do. They're about what the security officer can do. At 0800 hours, both systems received notification that the test was commencing. Reed's Sentinel AI immediately began processing thousands of inputs, its systems automatically adjusting threat levels, optimizing response paths, and maintaining perfect information flow. Every parameter was monitored, every variable calculated, and every potential threat assessed in real time. Morgan's approach was fundamentally different. She watched her basic camera feeds with practiced attention, noting subtle changes in lobby, traffic patterns, monitoring maintenance staff movements, and observing the way test evaluators positioned themselves throughout the East Wing. Where the AI saw data points, Morgan saw human behavior. The first simulated incident looked deceptively routine from the command center. Reed's voice remained calm and professional as he reported to the evaluation team. Sentinel has detected an unusual thermal signature in the East Wing electrical room. System shows optimal response path. Automated alert prioritization engaged. Security personnel deployment initiated. Control responded. Command center, we're seeing the response. Sentinel is handling the initial anomaly correctly. Maintain monitoring posture. Copy that, Reed replied. The eye is compensating automatically. No manual intervention required. As the simulation intensified, the differences between artificial and human intelligence became increasingly apparent. Reed's Sentinel, trusting its algorithms and automated assessments, maintained a systematic approach based on pre-programmed parameters. The system was making thousands of calculations per second, but they were calculations based on data that struggled to capture the unpredictable nature of emergencies. Morgan, navigating purely by experience and institutional knowledge, noticed patterns the sensors couldn't detect. The way certain evaluators were positioning themselves suggested an escalation pattern that wouldn't appear in any algorithm. The timing between simulated incidents revealed a testing strategy that no computer model had anticipated. 20 minutes into the simulation, Reed's confidence remained unshaken. Sentinel has identified and contained 3 separate anomalies simultaneously. Response time is 28% faster than manual protocols. Resource allocation is optimal across all sectors. In the East Wing, Morgan had already detected something the AI had missed entirely. The test evaluators were setting up a cascade scenario, a series of seemingly unrelated incidents that would eventually converge to create a major emergency. It was a pattern she had seen in training exercises for years, but one that artificial intelligence struggled to recognize without specific programming. She keyed a simple observation into her terminal. East Wing evaluators positioning for converging scenarios. Probable target, main electrical distribution. No algorithmic analysis. No predictive modeling, just human intuition based on years of experience. The observation went unacknowledged by the command center. As the morning progressed, Reed's Sentinel continued handling individual incidents with impressive efficiency. Each alert was categorized, prioritized, and addressed according to protocols that had been refined through thousands of simulations. The system was performing exactly as designed, methodically managing discrete problems through computational power. What the AI couldn't grasp was the human element, the deliberate pattern behind the seemingly random incidents, the psychological aspects of emergency response, and the unpredictable ways that building occupants might react to cascading failures. Director Reed, Morgan's voice finally broke into the command channel. The East Wing evaluators are creating a compound scenario. These aren't isolated incidents. Reed's response was dismissive. Terminal 7, the Sentinel has full spectrum awareness across all building systems. The AI is detecting and categorizing all anomalies according to threat level. The threat isn't in the individual anomalies, Morgan countered. It's in the pattern they're creating. There was a pause before Reed replied, his voice tight with barely controlled irritation. Terminal 7, please maintain your auxiliary monitoring role. The Sentinel's pattern recognition algorithms are far more sophisticated than any human observation. Morgan didn't argue further. Years of experience had taught her when to speak and when to prepare quietly for what was coming. By midday, the simulation had reached a critical phase. The evaluators had created 15 separate incidents throughout the building, each one skillfully designed to seem independent while actually forming part of a larger emergency scenario. Reed's AI was handling each individual problem efficiently, but it was missing the forest for the trees. The Sentinel is performing admirably, Reed reported to the evaluation team. Response times are exceeding benchmarks across all metrics. Threat containment is at optimal levels. Chief Engineer Reyes, monitoring building systems from his office, shook his head at the report. The maintenance sensors were telling a different story, one of gradually escalating strain on critical systems that the security AI was treating as unrelated anomalies rather than a coordinated attack. He contacted Morgan directly on a private channel. East Wing electrical distribution is showing unusual patterns. The security AI is treating each fluctuation as a separate minor incident, but together they're creating a potential overload condition. I see it, Morgan replied. They're testing cascade response capability. The AI is failing to recognize the pattern. Can you do anything from Terminal 7? Morgan's response was characteristic in its simplicity. I'm already doing it. While the Sentinel focused on individual incidents, Morgan had been quietly preparing for the larger emergency. She had updated her evacuation plans based on the evolving scenario, identified critical choke points that would emerge when multiple systems failed simultaneously, and mentally mapped the positions of every evaluator in her sector. At 13:35 hours, the simulation entered its final phase. The evaluators triggered a cascading failure that began with a localized power outage in the East Wing, followed by security door malfunctions, communication disruptions, and finally a simulated fire alarm. In a strategic location, Reed's voice betrayed the first hints of concern. Sentinel is detecting multiple high-priority alerts across the East Wing. System response optimization is fluctuating. The AI is recalibrating priorities based on changing conditions. The Sentinel, designed to handle individual emergencies with algorithmic precision, was struggling to process a scenario where problems compounded each other in ways its programming hadn't anticipated. The AI began shifting resources repeatedly, changing evacuation routes as new alerts emerged, and generating contradictory instructions as it attempted to optimize for too many variables simultaneously. Command Center, we're seeing some unusual patterns in the Sentinel's response, Control noted. The system appears to be cycling through multiple solutions without implementing any of them effectively. Reed's voice tightened further. The AI is processing complex variables and identifying optimal responses. This is how the system handles unprecedented scenarios. But the reality in the East Wing told a different story. The Sentinel's increasingly erratic responses were creating confusion among security personnel. Evacuation routes changed every 30 seconds, resource allocation shifted constantly. Communication priorities cycled through contradictory hierarchies. Captain Rivera, monitoring from her station, voiced what was becoming increasingly obvious. The AI can't decide on a coherent strategy. It's optimizing for too many variables simultaneously. For the first time in the exercise, Morgan's voice carried a note of quiet authority as she addressed the command center directly. Request permission to implement manual protocols in East Wing. The automated response is creating dangerous confusion. There was a pause before Control responded. Terminal 7, your auxiliary monitoring only. Primary response remains with the Sentinel. The Sentinel is compromised, Morgan replied simply. I have clear situational awareness and manual response capability. Director Reed's voice cut through the channel, tight with frustration. I don't need assistance from outdated protocols. I need my system to stabilize its optimization algorithms. But even as he spoke, the simulation evaluators introduced the final element, a complete power failure in the East Wing, followed by backup generator malfunction and emergency lighting disruption. It was the ultimate test of a security system's ability to handle cascading failures under challenging conditions. The Sentinel's response was immediate but deeply flawed. The AI, lacking clear data from failed sensors and unable to process the rapidly changing conditions, began generating contradictory evacuation instructions. Security personnel received constantly changing directives. Communication systems prioritized the wrong areas. Resource allocation became increasingly chaotic as the system attempted to optimize for conditions it could no longer accurately assess. What is happening? Reed demanded as his screens displayed algorithmic conflicts across the East Wing. The Sentinel is supposed to adapt to changing conditions. Captain Rivera, watching from her station, voiced what was becoming undeniable. The AI can't process this level of systemic failure. It's designed for predictable emergencies, not cascading chaos. For Morgan, watching from Terminal 7, the breaking point had arrived. Without waiting for authorization, she initiated the manual protocol she had prepared. Her actions weren't flashy or technologically impressive. She simply began doing what experienced security officers had done for decades before AI, making clear decisions based on the situation at hand. What are you doing? Reed demanded over the communication channel. Morgan didn't respond verbally. Instead, she demonstrated something the Sentinel couldn't process. She began implementing a coherent emergency response that anticipated human behavior rather than reacting to sensor data. Where the AI generated constantly changing evacuation routes as it processed conflicting information, Morgan established a single clear path that prioritized simplicity over theoretical optimization. Where the Sentinel allocated resources based on algorithmic calculations that changed every few seconds, Morgan made decisive assignments that remained consistent. Where automated communications became increasingly convoluted as the AI attempted to address multiple variables, Morgan's instructions were simple, clear, and unchanging. East Wing personnel, this is Terminal 7, she announced over the emergency channel. Disregard automated instructions. Implement manual protocol, Echo 7. Repeat, implement manual protocol, Echo 7. It was a direct countermand to the AI's authority, something that would have been unthinkable under normal circumstances. But as security officers in the East Wing received her clear, consistent instructions, the difference became immediately apparent. Where confusion had reigned moments before, a coherent response began to emerge. Reed, watching the East Wing camera feeds, saw something that challenged everything he believed about modern security technology. The supposedly outdated officer in a wheelchair was successfully coordinating an emergency response that his sophisticated AI couldn't manage. How are you doing that? He asked over a private channel. Understanding human behavior instead of processing data points, Morgan replied simply. But your systems. You don't have predictive analytics, threat assessment algorithms, automated resource allocation. That's why it works. The truth was becoming undeniable. The Sentinel, designed to handle predictable emergencies through computational power, was creating more problems than it solved in genuinely chaotic conditions. Every sensor that provided conflicting information, every algorithm that made calculations based on incomplete data, every AI protocol that couldn't process variables changing faster than it could compute, all of it was making the emergency harder to manage, not easier. Morgan's approach, by contrast, focused on fundamental security principles. When she gave an instruction, it remained consistent. When she established an evacuation route, it didn't change every 30 seconds. When she allocated resources, she considered human factors that no algorithm could quantify. Terminal 7, this is control. We're showing you implementing unauthorized protocols in the East Wing. Please confirm your response authority. Reed answered before Morgan could respond. Control, Terminal 7 has better situational awareness than my system. I'm authorizing her protocols. It was an admission that cost Reed considerable pride, but it was also an acknowledgement of reality. The most advanced security system in the corporate sector was being successfully managed through impossible conditions by an officer using the kind of fundamental security knowledge that existed long before artificial intelligence. Terminal 7, can you expand your protocols to sections Delta and Foxtrot? Affirmative. Security teams should implement manual protocol Echo 7 building-wide. The Sentinel can provide monitoring support even if it can't lead response coordination. As Morgan's protocols spread throughout the building, the simulated emergency response transformed from algorithmic chaos to human-directed clarity. Security personnel, freed from constantly changing AI directives, implemented a coherent strategy that prioritized simplicity, consistency, and clear communication. This is remarkable, muttered one of the evaluation team members, watching the transformation unfold on their monitoring tablets. The manual protocols are outperforming the AI by every metric. The simulation continued for another 20 minutes, with Morgan's clear, experience-based approach guiding the building's security response through increasingly challenging conditions. When the evaluators finally called an end to the exercise, the contrast couldn't have been more striking. The sections operating under Morgan's direction had maintained organized, effective emergency management. The areas still following the Sentinel's automated guidance remained chaotic and inefficient. As systems returned to normal and the evaluation team gathered their data, Chief Engineer Reyes approached Morgan's terminal with a rare smile. That was the most effective emergency response I've seen in 15 years with this building. Morgan nodded once, acknowledging the comment without celebration. The systems don't matter if the fundamentals aren't solid. Director Reed stood nearby, listening to the exchange with an expression that mixed professional dismay with dawning recognition. His multi-million-dollar AI system, the technology he had championed throughout his career, had been comprehensively outperformed by basic security protocols implemented by an officer he had marginalized for years. Terminal 7, he said finally, using her station designation rather than her name, a small but telling detail. How did you know what the evaluators were planning? The Sentinel had access to all the same data. Morgan's response was characteristic. In its simplicity, the AI was processing what the sensors detected. I was watching what the people were doing. It was a fundamental distinction that no amount of technological sophistication could overcome. The Sentinel saw data points, calculations, and algorithmic patterns. Morgan saw human intentions, behavioral indicators, and the subtle cues that experienced security professionals recognized through years of observation. As the day ended and evaluation teams packed their equipment, Captain Rivera approached Morgan's station with newfound respect in her expression. That was incredible. You coordinated an entire building response from a terminal that doesn't even have modern communications protocols. Modern isn't always better, Morgan replied. Sometimes it's just more complicated. Reed, overhearing the comment, found himself facing an uncomfortable truth. His career had been built on the promise of technological solutions, the belief that artificial intelligence could replace human judgment in crisis situations. Today had demonstrated the fundamental flaw in that thinking. AI excelled at processing data, but emergencies weren't about data. They were about people, unpredictability, and the kind of intuitive understanding that came only through experience. The debriefing would be difficult. The evaluation data would raise uncomfortable questions about the millions spent on advanced systems. The corporate leadership would demand explanations for why their technological showcase had failed its most important test. But as Morgan wheeled away from Terminal 7, those concerns belonged to someone else. She had done what she always did, applied fundamental security principles to protect people in challenging circumstances. The technology didn't matter. The recognition didn't matter. What mattered was that when artificial intelligence had failed, human experience had succeeded. That evening, as the last evaluators left the building and regular operations prepared to resume the following day, Morgan sat alone in the East Wing security office. Her manual protocols had been filed and stored, her terminal secured for the night, her observations recorded in the kind of detailed notes that computerized systems had largely replaced. On her desk lay the security manual she had studied for 15 years, its pages worn from constant reference, its margins filled with handwritten observations that no algorithm could generate. She had opened it to a page marked Cascading Emergency Response and added a single line in her precise handwriting. Systems fail. Training remains. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new technologies, and perhaps new recognition of what truly mattered in emergency response. But for tonight, in the quiet of an empty office, there was just the satisfaction of knowing that when everything else had failed, the fundamentals had prevailed. And in a world increasingly dominated by artificial intelligence and automated systems, that knowledge was more valuable than any technology could ever be. The evaluation report landed on CEO Catherine Westfield's desk with the weight of uncomfortable truth. Compiled by the independent security assessment team, its conclusions were both clear and damning. The Sentinel AI security system, the cornerstone of Westfield Corporate Plaza's much-publicized technological showcase, had failed its most critical test. The report's executive summary pulled no punches. Under conditions of cascading system failures, the AI-driven response protocols demonstrated significant limitations that created additional hazards rather than mitigating existing ones. Catherine Westfield, founder and CEO of the Westfield Group, was not known for tolerating failure. Her sleek office on the top floor of the plaza reflected the same cutting-edge aesthetic that defined her corporate vision: clean lines, advanced technology, and uncompromising efficiency. She tapped manicured fingers against the report's cover page, her expression unreadable as she considered the implications for the company's reputation, its security strategy, and the millions invested in artificial intelligence solutions. "Tell me about Terminal 7, she said finally, addressing the three people seated across from her. Director Reed shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Chief Engineer Reyes remained impassive. Captain Rivera looked directly at her boss with the confidence of someone whose professional assessment had been vindicated. "Terminal 7 is our designation for the auxiliary monitoring station," Reed began carefully. "It's operated by Morgan Chen, a 15-year veteran of our security team. During the assessment exercise, she implemented manual protocols that proved more effective than the Sentinel's automated response." "More effective?" Westfield repeated, her tone making it clear she expected precision in language. "Significantly more effective," Reed admitted. The manual protocols coordinated by Officer Chen maintained clear communication and consistent response patterns during conditions that overwhelmed the AI's decision-making algorithms. Westfield turned her attention to the building's chief engineer. "Mr. Reyes, you've been with this company since we broke ground on the plaza. Your assessment?" Reyes straightened in his chair. "Ms. Westfield, I've seen security systems evolve. From basic camera monitors to sophisticated AI like the Sentinel. What I witnessed during that exercise wasn't a technology failure. It was a reminder that human judgment still matters in crisis situations." "Explain." "The Sentinel performed exactly as designed," Reyes continued. "It processed data, analyzed variables, and generated responses based on program parameters. The problem is that real emergencies don't follow programmed parameters. They're chaotic, unpredictable, and often defy algorithmic logic." "And Officer Chen?" Westfield pressed. "She demonstrated what 15 years of security experience looks like in action." Yet here was compelling evidence that in certain critical situations, human judgment still outperformed even the most sophisticated AI systems. It wasn't a comfortable realization for someone who had built her corporate strategy around technological solutions, but Catherine Westfield hadn't become a successful CEO by ignoring uncomfortable truths. The following morning, Director Reed found a message waiting when he arrived at his office. The CEO required his presence at an executive meeting, scheduled for 0900 hours. The subject line read simply, "Security Operations Restructuring." Reed arrived at the executive conference room precisely on time, his normally confident demeanor subdued by uncertainty about what the meeting might entail. The assessment results had shaken his professional standing within the company. The CEO's personal interest in Officer Chen suggested changes were coming, changes that might directly impact his leadership position. He was surprised to find Morgan Chen already seated at the conference table, her wheelchair positioned at a space where a regular chair had been removed to accommodate her. Also present were Chief Engineer Reyes, Captain Rivera, and several members of the executive leadership team. Catherine Westfield sat at the head of the table, tablet in hand, reviewing documents with focused attention. "Director Reed," she acknowledged without looking up, "please be seated. We're about to begin." Reed took the only remaining chair, directly across from Morgan. He nodded stiffly in her direction, receiving a polite nod in return. Before he could speculate further about the meeting's purpose, Westfield activated the room's presentation system. "Yesterday's security assessment has prompted a necessary reevaluation of our approach to building safety," she began without preamble. "The results were clear. Our technological solution failed under complex conditions, while traditional security methods implemented by Officer Chen succeeded remarkably well." She tapped her tablet, bringing up the assessment report's executive summary on the main display. "This creates a strategic challenge for Westfield Corporate. We've invested heavily in artificial intelligence as the cornerstone of our security infrastructure. We've marketed this building as a technological showcase. We've assured our tenants that the Sentinel represents the pinnacle of modern security technology." Reed shifted uncomfortably in his chair. This sounded like the prelude to a major corporate reversal, possibly including his replacement as security director. He glanced at Morgan, trying to gauge her reaction, but her expression remained professionally neutral. "However," Westfield continued, "I didn't build this company by ignoring evidence that contradicts my assumptions. Yesterday's assessment provided clear evidence that our approach requires adjustment." She tapped her tablet again, bringing up a new organizational chart on the display. At the top was Integrated Security Operations, with two parallel branches beneath it. One labeled Technical Systems still showed Reed's name. The other, labeled Human Operations, showed a position titled Chief of Emergency Response, with no name assigned. "Effective immediately," Westfield Security will implement an integrated approach that balances technological capability with human expertise. Director Reed will continue overseeing our technical systems, including the Sentinel AI. We're creating a new position, Chief of Emergency Response, who will develop protocols, train personnel, and ensure that human judgment remains central to our security operations. Reed's tension visibly eased at the news that he would retain his position, though in a reconfigured role with less overall authority. His gaze shifted to Morgan again, understanding dawning on his features. Officer Morgan Chen, Westfield announced. Confirming his suspicion, will assume the position of Chief of Emergency Response, with authority equal to the Technical Systems Director. Together, they will ensure that Westfield Plaza maintains the most effective security operation possible, one that leverages both advanced technology and human experience. There was a moment of surprised silence around the table. Morgan herself appeared momentarily taken aback by the announcement, though she quickly composed her features. "Ms. Westfield," Reed began cautiously, "Officer Chen's mobility limitations proved irrelevant to her effectiveness during an actual emergency." Westfield interrupted firmly, as demonstrated conclusively during the assessment. Her wheelchair didn't prevent her from coordinating a building-wide response that outperformed our most advanced technology. She turned her attention directly to Morgan. "Officer Chen, do you accept this position?" Morgan met the CEO's gaze with characteristic directness. "Yes, ma'am, I do." "Excellent. Your first priority will be developing an integrated training program that combines the Sentinel's capabilities with traditional security fundamentals. I want every officer in this building to understand both approaches." Westfield then addressed the entire group. "Let me be clear about what this represents. We're not abandoning technological advancement. The Sentinel remains a valuable component of our security infrastructure. But we're acknowledging that human judgment and experience provide critical capabilities that artificial intelligence hasn't yet mastered." She looked directly at Reed. "This isn't a demotion, Director. It's a course correction based on clear evidence. I expect you and Chief Chen to work together effectively to implement this integrated approach." Reed nodded, professional enough to recognize when adaptation was required. "Understood, Ms. Westfield." "Good. I've scheduled a press briefing for tomorrow morning where we'll announce Westfield's pioneering approach to integrated security operations. We're going to lead the industry not just in technology deployment, but in recognizing when human expertise remains irreplaceable." As the meeting concluded and participants began to disperse, Westfield approached Morgan directly. "A moment of your time, Chief Chen?" Morgan remained at the table as others filed out, Reed glancing back with an unreadable expression as he departed. When they were alone, Westfield sat beside her. "I want you to understand something. This isn't a token promotion or a public relations gesture. Yesterday's assessment revealed a critical vulnerability in our security approach, one that you uniquely demonstrated how to address." Morgan nodded. "I understand, Ms. Westfield, and I appreciate the opportunity. Your new office is being prepared on the security operations floor. You'll have access to all building systems, direct authority over emergency response protocols, and equal input on security staffing decisions. There will be resistance from Reed, certainly, possibly from others who share his technological bias. Are you prepared for that?" "I've been underestimated for most of my career, Ms. Westfield," Morgan replied with quiet confidence. "It hasn't stopped me yet." The CEO smiled slightly, a rare expression from the normally reserved executive. "No, I don't imagine it has." She stood to leave, then added, "One last thing. Terminal 7 is being completely upgraded with new equipment. I thought you should know." Morgan's expression showed surprise for the first time. "With respect, Ms. Westfield, I've grown accustomed to those systems. They're reliable for what I need." "That may be true, but optics matter in corporate environments. The chief of emergency response can't be seen using outdated equipment in a corner station. It undermines authority. Westfield paused, studying Morgan's reaction. Unless there's another reason you prefer the older systems. Morgan considered her response carefully. The newer interfaces prioritize automated functions. They're designed for officers who rely on AI assistance. The older systems require direct input and interpretation, skills that many security personnel have forgotten as technology has advanced. Understanding dawned in Westfield's eyes. You want to maintain Terminal 7 as a training station. A place where officers learn to function without AI assistance. Yes, ma'am. Technology fails. Human judgment shouldn't. The CEO nodded slowly. Keep your station, Chief Chen, but we'll upgrade the adjacent positions for your training program. Show me the proposal by end of week. As Westfield departed, Morgan sat alone in the conference room, absorbing the sudden transformation of her professional circumstances. After years of being marginalized and underestimated, her experience and approach had been vindicated in the most public way possible. The challenge ahead was significant. Integrating human judgment with artificial intelligence in a security environment that had become increasingly dependent on technology would require both diplomatic skill and unwavering conviction. Reed would resist. Others would question her authority. The technological bias that pervaded modern security operations wouldn't disappear overnight. But as she navigated her wheelchair out of the conference room toward her familiar station, soon to become the centerpiece of a new training program, Morgan felt a quiet certainty that she had been preparing for this role throughout her entire career. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, and a fundamentally different approach to building security. The Sentinel would continue providing its computational capabilities. Reed would continue advocating for technological solutions. But they would now be balanced by something equally valuable, the irreplaceable human judgment that only came through years of experience and the kind of institutional knowledge that couldn't be programmed into any algorithm. As Morgan returned to Terminal 7, she found Captain Rivera waiting with an expression that mixed genuine pleasure with professional respect. "Congratulations, Chief," Rivera said simply. "It's about time." Morgan nodded her acknowledgement. "Thank you, Captain. But the real work is just beginning. What's first on your agenda?" Morgan glanced around the security center where officers monitored advanced displays with varying degrees of attention, many relying heavily on the Sentinel's automated alerts rather than developing their own situational awareness. "We start by remembering what security meant before artificial intelligence, when officers had to think, observe, and make judgments without algorithmic assistance. Then we integrate that foundation with the technology, creating officers who understand both approaches." Rivera smiled. "Reed won't like it." "Reed will adapt," Morgan replied with quiet confidence. "Because fundamentally, we both want the same thing, a security operation that protects this building under any circumstances. We just disagree about how to achieve it." As the day progressed and news of her promotion spread throughout the security team, Morgan continued her regular monitoring duties at Terminal 7. Officers approached throughout the day, some offering congratulations, others curious about what changes might be coming, a few clearly uncertain about having a chief in a wheelchair. She answered their questions with the same calm professionalism that had characterized her entire career, neither emphasizing her new authority nor diminishing the significance of the organizational change. By day's end, the initial shock had begun to transform into cautious acceptance among most of the security team. That evening, as regular operations wound down and the night shift took their positions, Morgan wheeled herself through the building one final time as a regular security officer. Tomorrow she would begin her new role with all its attendant responsibilities and challenges. As she moved through the East Wing, where her manual protocols had outperformed the Sentinel's automated responses, She reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 15 years of security experience. 3 years of marginalization. After her accident, countless instances of being underestimated, overlooked, or simply forgotten. None of it had broken her resolve or diminished her commitment to fundamental security principles. She had continued studying, observing, and preparing for a moment she couldn't have predicted but had always believed would come, when experience would prove more valuable than technology, and human judgment would demonstrate its irreplaceable role in protecting people during chaotic conditions. Tomorrow would bring a new chapter in that journey, one where her approach would shape the future of security operations not just at Westfield Plaza, but potentially throughout the industry. The press briefing would generate attention. Other companies would take notice. The integrated approach might become a new standard that balanced technological capability with human expertise. But for tonight, in the quiet of an empty building illuminated only by security lighting, there was just the satisfaction of knowing that perseverance had prevailed over prejudice, and fundamentals had proven more resilient than technology. The wheelchair that some had seen as a limitation had become irrelevant in the face of demonstrated capability. The experience that others had dismissed as outdated had proven essential when advanced systems failed. As Morgan completed her final round and headed toward the exit, she passed Terminal 7, her station for 3 years and now the symbolic center of a new approach to building security. She paused briefly, looking at the worn keyboard and basic monitors that had been her tools throughout the marginalization. Tomorrow would transform everything, but the fundamentals would remain unchanged. Security wasn't about the technology. It never had been. It was about judgment, experience, and the kind of institutional knowledge that only came through years of dedicated service. That truth had saved Westfield Plaza during a simulated emergency. Soon it would reshape the entire approach to building security. And the officer in the wheelchair, once forgotten at the edge of operations, would lead that transformation with the same quiet competence that had defined her entire career. 6 months later, Westfield Corporate Plaza had become something unprecedented. In modern corporate security, the building that once showcased technology above all else now demonstrated a balanced approach that industry leaders across the country were beginning to study and emulate. Chen wheeled through the newly redesigned Security Operations Center, observing with quiet satisfaction how thoroughly the space had transformed. Where once a strict division had separated advanced technology from basic monitoring, now the room functioned as an integrated whole. At each station, officers worked with systems that balanced AI assistance with human judgment, technological capability with experiential knowledge. Terminal 7 remained in its original position, though, no longer isolated at the far corner. It had become the centerpiece of a training area where every security officer, from newest recruit to senior team leader, regularly practiced emergency response without AI support. The station's basic interface and direct controls had been maintained, though the surrounding equipment had been upgraded to create what the security team now called the fundamental zone. Lieutenant Marco Alvarez, one of the security team's newest officers, looked up from Terminal 7 as Morgan approached. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the climate-controlled environment, evidence of the mental exertion required to manage security protocols without algorithmic assistance. "How's it feeling?" Morgan asked, noting his determined expression as he manually tracked multiple camera feeds. "Like learning to walk again after depending on crutches," Alvarez admitted, his eyes never leaving the monitors. "I've been working with integrated systems for 3 years, but I never really understood how the alert prioritization functions until I had to do it myself." Morgan nodded, watching his hands move across the controls with growing confidence. "That's exactly the point. Understanding the fundamentals makes you more effective with the advanced systems, not less." Alvarez completed his training session and logged his results, a protocol Morgan had instituted to track progress as officers developed capabilities that many had forgotten or never learned. I was skeptical when you first implemented the fundamentals training, Chief. It seemed like a step backward. And now? Now I understand why you insisted on it. Last week during the power fluctuation, I knew exactly what the Sentinel was doing because I'd done it manually myself. I could anticipate its responses instead of just waiting for automated alerts. Morgan smiled slightly, a rare expression. For an officer known throughout the building for her composed professionalism. That's the integration we've been working toward. Not humans versus technology, but humans understanding technology well enough to work seamlessly with it, or without it when necessary. As she continued her morning rounds, Morgan passed the main security desk where Director Reed was reviewing system performance metrics with two technicians. Their relationship had evolved over the past 6 months from initial tension to grudging respect and finally to a productive partnership based on mutual recognition of complementary strengths. "Morning, Chief Chen," Reed acknowledged, his tone professional but no longer carrying the dismissive edge that had once characterized their interactions. The overnight system diagnostics showed some unusual access patterns in the West Wing. Nothing critical, but the Sentinel flagged it for human review. "I saw the report," Morgan replied. "Officer Torres is already investigating. Initial assessment suggests it's maintenance personnel using outdated access codes. We'll have confirmation by noon." Reed nodded, accepting her assessment without question. A significant evolution from the days when he would have insisted on technological verification of any human observation. The system integration upgrade is scheduled for next week. Your team ready for the transition? We've run 3 preparedness drills. All officers have completed both technical and manual protocols. We're ready. The exchange was brief, but represented months of careful bridge building between technological and human-centered approaches to security. Neither Reed nor Morgan had abandoned their core perspectives, but both had learned to value what the other brought to building safety. Later that morning, Morgan found herself in CEO Catherine Westfield's office, presenting the quarterly security assessment that had become a standard part of corporate governance. Chief Engineer Reyes sat beside her, contributing the system's perspective to her operational overview. "Integrated response metrics continue to improve," Morgan explained, highlighting key data points on her tablet. "Officers are demonstrating increased capability in both AI-assisted and manual protocols. Transition times between automated and direct control have decreased by 38% since implementation." Westfield reviewed the figures with characteristic thoroughness. "And the practical implications? In an actual emergency, our security team can now function effectively regardless of system status. If the Sentinel is operational, they work with it intelligently. If systems are compromised, they continue functioning with minimal disruption." Reyes added his perspective. "We're also seeing unexpected benefits in system performance. Because security officers now understand the fundamental processes behind the AI, they're providing feedback that's helping us refine the algorithms. The Sentinel is actually functioning more effectively because humans are teaching it experiential patterns." Westfield nodded, satisfied with the progress. "The industry response?" "Significant interest," Morgan confirmed. "We've hosted delegations from 12 major corporate security operations in the past month. 3 have already begun implementing similar integrated approaches. The Sanderson Group has requested a comprehensive consultation on transitioning their entire portfolio of properties to our model." "And the press?" "Building Security Today is running a feature next month on what they're calling the Westfield method. They're particularly interested in how we've balanced technological advancement with fundamental security principles." The CEO allowed herself a small smile, the corporate equivalent of unbridled enthusiasm. "Excellent. What began as a Response to a failed assessment has positioned us as industry leaders in a whole new category. Well done, Chief Chen. As the meeting concluded and Morgan prepared to leave, Westfield asked her to remain behind for a moment. When they were alone, the CEO's expression became more thoughtful. You've accomplished something remarkable in these past 6 months, Morgan. Not just in improving our security operations, but in changing fundamental assumptions about capability and limitation. Morgan tilted her head slightly, questioning. When you first joined Westfield Security, how many officers in wheelchairs were employed across our properties? Just me, as far as I know. And now? 7, across 4 different locations. Westfield nodded. Because you demonstrated that physical mobility isn't the determining factor in security effectiveness. You've changed the hiring practices across our entire corporation without ever directly addressing the issue. Morgan hadn't considered this broader impact of her work. She had focused exclusively on security fundamentals, on integrating human judgment with technological capability, on ensuring that Westfield Plaza remained safe under any conditions. The fact that her success had opened doors for others with physical disabilities was an unintended but profoundly meaningful consequence. There's another dimension to what you've accomplished, Westfield continued. You've provided a compelling case study in the limitations of artificial intelligence, not just in security, but across numerous applications. Your experience is informing conversations at the executive level about how we balance automation with human oversight throughout our operations. That wasn't my intention, Morgan acknowledged. I was simply applying security fundamentals as I understood them. The most significant innovations rarely come from deliberate disruption, Westfield observed. They emerge from people solving practical problems with the knowledge they've accumulated through experience. You solved a security problem. In doing so, you've influenced our entire corporate philosophy about the relationship between humans and technology. As Morgan left the executive floor and returned to the Security Operations Center, she reflected on how thoroughly circumstances had changed in 6 months. The officer once relegated to an outdated terminal in a forgotten corner had become a chief whose approach was reshaping security operations throughout the industry. The wheelchair that some had seen as disqualifying had become irrelevant to her professional effectiveness. The experience that others had dismissed as outdated had proven essential when advanced systems failed. That afternoon, she conducted the monthly emergency response training that had become a cornerstone of the integrated security approach. 20 officers gathered in the main briefing room, their tablets displaying both the Sentinel's interface and the manual protocols Morgan had developed. Today's scenario involves cascading system failures similar to what we experienced during the assessment 6 months ago. She began, navigating her wheelchair to the front of the room with practiced ease. The difference is that you now have both technological and manual tools to address the situation. Your challenge is knowing when to use each. Captain Rivera, now Morgan's second-in-command for human operations, activated the simulation system. Initial conditions are displaying on your tablets. The exercise begins in 30 seconds. As officers prepared for the drill, Morgan observed their focused readiness with professional satisfaction. Where once they would have relied exclusively on automated alerts and algorithmic guidance, now they balanced technological assistance with direct observation and experiential judgment. They understood both approaches and could transition seamlessly between them as conditions required. The simulation began with subtle anomalies, the kind that automated systems often misclassified or overlooked entirely. Morgan watched as officers noted these early indicators not because alerts prompted them, but because their trained observation skills detected patterns that suggested emerging problems. East Wing showing unusual access patterns, reported Officer Santiago, identifying a potential security breach before the Sentinel had flagged it as significant. Maintenance logs don't show scheduled work in that sector. Communication hub. Experiencing intermittent signal degradation, added Officer Washington. Pattern suggests deliberate interference rather than technical malfunction. As the scenario escalated, officers continued demonstrating the integrated approach that defined the new Westfield method. They utilized the Sentinel's computational capabilities for data processing and resource coordination while applying human judgment to interpretation and decision-making. When automated systems flagged potential threats, officers evaluated them through experiential filters rather than accepting algorithmic assessments without question. The result was a security response that leveraged both technological efficiency and human insight, a balanced approach that proved more effective than either could achieve independently. As the exercise concluded, Morgan addressed the team with quiet authority. 6 months ago, many of you were trained to trust automated systems above your own judgment. Today, you demonstrated something far more valuable, the ability to work with technology as a tool rather than depend on it as a crutch. Officer Alvarez, who had completed his fundamentals training that morning, raised his hand. "Chief, I've been wondering, why did it take a major assessment failure for the industry to recognize the limitations of automated security? Wasn't the evidence already there in smaller incidents?" It was an insightful question that cut to the heart of the transformation Morgan had led. She considered her response carefully, aware that her answer would shape how these officers approached security throughout their careers. The evidence was there, she acknowledged, but recognizing it required questioning fundamental assumptions about progress and capability. We collectively assumed that newer automatically meant better, that automation inherently improved outcomes, and that human judgment was an outdated resource to be replaced rather than a complementary capability to be integrated. She gestured toward the tablets displaying both automated and manual interfaces. What you're learning isn't to reject technological advancement. It's to maintain perspective about what technology can and cannot do. The Sentinel processes data more efficiently than any human ever could. But it cannot understand human behavior, anticipate unpredictable responses, or make judgment calls based on experiential knowledge. Those remain uniquely human capabilities. Rivera added her perspective. What the assessment demonstrated wasn't the failure of technology, but the failure of our approach to technology. We treated the Sentinel as a replacement for human judgment, rather than a supplement to it. The integrated method corrects that fundamental error. As officers departed to resume their regular duties, Director Reed entered the briefing room. His relationship with the training program had evolved significantly over the months. Initially skeptical about emphasizing manual protocols, he had gradually recognized their value in creating more effective security officers, even when those officers were primarily working with advanced systems. Impressive results, he noted. Reviewing the simulation data on his tablet, response times are 27% faster than pre-integration benchmarks. Resource allocation is more efficient. Communication clarity has improved across all metrics. Morgan acknowledged the assessment with a professional nod. The technology performs better when operators understand the fundamentals behind it. That's true across disciplines, not just in security. Reed's expression suggested he was still processing this reality, a career technologist, coming to terms with the limitations of his approach. I've been reviewing incident reports from other corporate properties that rely exclusively on automated security. The patterns are concerning. Minor incidents that should be easily contained often escalate because officers lack the judgment to intervene appropriately when systems provide ambiguous guidance. That's why the integrated approach matters, Morgan replied. It's not about choosing between human judgment and technological capability. It's about ensuring that each compensates for the limitations of the other. A balanced perspective that I should have recognized sooner, Reed admitted with uncharacteristic humility. I spent years advocating for systems that would make human security officers obsolete. I never considered that the most effective approach would involve strengthening human capabilities rather than replacing them. For Morgan, this acknowledgement represented the final validation of the transformation she had led. The director who had once marginalized her to an outdated terminal because of her wheelchair now recognized the fundamental value of her approach. The technology advocate who had dismissed experience as obsolete now acknowledged its irreplaceable role in effective security operations. As evening settled over Westfield Corporate Plaza and the day shift prepared to hand over to night operations, Morgan conducted her final building inspection. She navigated familiar corridors with the kind of intimate knowledge that came only through years of dedicated observation, noting subtle details that no sensor could detect and no algorithm could interpret. The East Wing, where her manual protocols had first demonstrated their effectiveness during the assessment, had been designated as the primary training sector for integrated operations. Security officers now rotated through specialized exercises designed to develop both technological proficiency and fundamental judgment, the dual pillars of the Westfield method. Near the main lobby, Morgan encountered a group of visitors, being escorted by Catherine Westfield herself, an unusual occurrence that signaled the importance of these particular guests. The CEO nodded in acknowledgement as Morgan approached. Chief Chen, perfect timing. These are the security directors from the Metropolitan Corporate Association. They've come to observe our integrated operations firsthand. The visitors, 6 men and women representing major corporate properties across the region, regarded Morgan with professional interest. Their expressions revealed the subtle surprise that still occasionally greeted her position as security chief, despite her wheelchair, a reaction that had diminished but not disappeared entirely over the months. Chief Chen's leadership has been instrumental in developing what we now call the Westfield method, Westfield explained. She's transformed our approach to security operations by integrating human judgment with technological capability in ways that maximize the strengths of both. The senior security director from Meridian Tower stepped forward. We've been following your results with considerable interest. Chief Chen, the industry has invested billions in automated security systems over the past decade. Your approach challenges fundamental assumptions about that investment. Morgan met his gaze directly. Not challenges. Director contextualizes. The Sentinel and similar systems represent remarkable technological achievements. They process data, monitor conditions, and coordinate resources with efficiency no human team could match. What they cannot do is understand human behavior, anticipate unpredictable responses, or apply experiential judgment to ambiguous situations. So your approach is what, reducing dependence on automated systems? Integrating them with human capabilities, Morgan corrected. Our officers utilize the Sentinel's computational efficiency, while applying their own judgment to interpretation and decision-making. The result is more effective than either approach alone. Another visitor, the security director from Callaway Financial Center, gestured toward Morgan's wheelchair. Forgive my directness, but how does your mobility limitation affect your ability to respond during actual emergencies? It was a question Morgan had answered countless times throughout her career, though rarely stated so bluntly. Westfield began to intervene, but Morgan raised a hand slightly, indicating she would address the question herself. Director, during the assessment that prompted our integrated approach, I coordinated a building-wide emergency response from a single terminal while seated in this wheelchair. The response outperformed a state-of-the-art AI system by every measurable metric. She held the director's gaze steadily. Security effectiveness isn't determined by physical mobility. It's determined by judgment, experience, and the ability to make sound decisions under pressure. Those qualities aren't affected by my wheelchair. The directness of her response earned respectful nods from several visitors. The Callaway director had the grace to look slightly abashed at having his assumption so thoroughly countered. We've prepared a comprehensive demonstration of our integrated operations, Westfield continued smoothly. Chief Chen's team will show you how we've balanced technological capability with human expertise to create a more resilient security approach. As the group moved toward the Security Operations Center for their scheduled demonstration, the Meridian Tower director fell into step beside Morgan's wheelchair. "I've been in corporate security for 25 years, he said quietly. "I've watched our profession become increasingly dependent on automated systems and algorithmic decision-making. Many of us have had concerns about what's been lost in that transition, but the momentum seemed unstoppable." Morgan glanced up at him, recognizing a perspective that aligned with her own experience. "What you've accomplished here provides a blueprint for addressing those concerns without rejecting technological advancement," he continued. "You've demonstrated that we can embrace innovation while preserving the fundamental human judgment that defines true security expertise. That was always the goal," Morgan acknowledged. "Not to choose between approaches, but to integrate them effectively." The visitor nodded thoughtfully. "The wheelchair gives you a unique perspective that most of us miss. We became so focused on what technology could do that we forgot to question what it couldn't do. You never had that luxury." It was an insight Morgan hadn't considered, that her physical circumstances had perhaps protected her from the industry's over-reliance on technological solutions. While others had embraced automation as the answer to every security challenge, she had maintained focus on the fundamentals that technology couldn't replace. The demonstration that followed showcased the integrated security operation that had evolved under Morgan's leadership. Visitors observed as officers moved seamlessly between automated and manual protocols, utilizing technological tools while applying human judgment to interpretation and decision-making. They watched training exercises in the fundamental zone, where even the most technologically proficient officers practice security responses without AI assistance. Throughout the presentation, Morgan noted the visitors' growing appreciation for what Westfield had created, not a rejection of technological advancement, but a more nuanced integration of human and automated capabilities than anything they had previously encountered. As the evening concluded and the delegation prepared to depart, the Meridian Tower director approached Morgan one final time. "You've started something important here, Chief Chen, something that extends far beyond building security. The questions you're addressing about the proper integration of human judgment and artificial intelligence apply across industries and disciplines." Morgan nodded, acknowledging the broader implications while maintaining her characteristic focus on practical application. "We're still learning, Director. The integration isn't perfect, and both approaches have limitations we're constantly working to address." "That's precisely what makes it valuable," he replied. "You're not offering simplistic answers about human versus machine. You're demonstrating how to develop a balanced approach that maximizes the strengths of both." As the visitors departed and regular evening operations resumed, Morgan completed her final inspection rounds before preparing to hand over to the night shift supervisor. The building hummed with the quiet efficiency of well-integrated systems, both technological and human, working in concert to maintain security under any conditions. She paused briefly near Terminal 7, where it all had begun 6 months earlier. The station remained fundamentally unchanged, despite the transformation that had occurred around it. Its basic interface and direct controls continued serving as a reminder that sometimes the most valuable capabilities were the fundamental ones that technology couldn't replicate. In the quiet evening light, Morgan reflected on the journey that had brought Westfield security to this moment. What had begun as a marginalized officer's dedication to fundamentals had evolved into an industry-leading approach that balanced technological innovation with human judgment. The wheelchair that some had seen as a limitation had become irrelevant in the face of demonstrated capability. The experience that others had dismissed as outdated had proven essential when advanced systems failed. The security operations center around her represented something unprecedented in modern corporate environments, not the triumph of technology over human capability, nor the rejection of innovation in favor of tradition, but the thoughtful integration of both approaches to create something more resilient than either could achieve alone. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new technologies, and new opportunities to refine the balanced approach that had become Westfield's signature contribution to the security industry. The Sentinel would continue evolving, its algorithms becoming more sophisticated with each iteration. Security officers would continue developing both technological proficiency and fundamental judgment through the integrated training program. And at the center of it all would remain the enduring truth that Morgan had demonstrated 6 months earlier. When systems fail, when technology reaches its limits, when unpredictable circumstances defy algorithmic solutions, it is human judgment, experience, and the kind of quiet competence that comes only through years of dedicated service that makes the critical difference between crisis and resolution. Not because human capability is superior to technological innovation, but because the most effective approach integrates both, leveraging the computational efficiency of advanced systems while preserving the experiential judgment that remains uniquely human. In a world increasingly defined by artificial intelligence and automated solutions, that balanced perspective had proven not just valuable but essential. And the security officer in the wheelchair, once forgotten at an outdated terminal, had led the way in demonstrating its transformative potential. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.